Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video, we're finally going to be doing my Bard multi-class tier list video. So, as you probably realize, I've had some problems lately. I was sick for a bunch of time. My phone has been acting up, but I just got a new phone today, so hopefully everything's going to be fine. And, so we've had some issues, but hopefully everything's going to be back on track now. I noticed we just broke the 900 subscriber benchmark, so that's good. Getting close to 1,000, that's pretty exciting. I didn't know if my channel would ever get this big, and now it is. So, that's pretty exciting for me. But anyways, let's just jump right into it. So, Bard. Bard is one of the strongest multi-classes in the game, in my opinion. They are great for both dipping just a little bit of Bard, but they're also great as a main class. Because of the fact that they're a primary spellcaster, they tend to do very well as, as your core class. But because you get things like Jack of all trades and expertise with only very small dips, they also can add a lot to a different class. So for the purposes of this video, we're going to be focusing more on Bard focused video classes. There will be some where we'll take more, like maybe 6 or 7 levels of something else combined with Bard potentially. But a lot of these are going to be looking at just dipping into something else a little bit and focusing mostly on Bard. The other nice things about Bard, of course, you got Bardic Inspiration, which you can pass out to allies, buffing people. Song of Rest is very nice. But one of the other core strengths of the Bard class, in my opinion, for multi-classing especially, is that you can get extra attack as a Bard, meaning that you could focus more on a martial build, or you could take a Bardic subclass that doesn't get extra attack and focus more on casting builds. And that versatility, the ability to do either one, I think is one of the things that Bards really shine at. Now, I will say that as a core class, especially as a martial, Bards are very squishy with only a D8 hit points and light armor. And only the Valor Bard gets better than that. They get medium armor and a shield, which is at least pretty good. But College of Swords, for example, your armor class sucks. But, as I always say, one of the main reasons I like to multi-class, number one reason to multi-class is to double down on your core proficiency, just try to be really, really good at one aspect of the game and just dominate in that pillar of play. But number two is to cover for the core weaknesses of your class. And I think that by adding classes that give us better armor options, suddenly that College of Valor or that College of Swords especially starts to look really, really good. The other problem with the College of Valor and College of Swords is that while they're both very serviceable martial classes, they aren't primary martials. And so they don't really pump out the damage that a fighter or a barbarian or even a ranger or a paladin tend to do. But by multi-classing with other classes, you can add those kind of things. You can add smites, you can add reckless attack or whatever else you want to your Bard. And suddenly you've got a class that can do some pretty decent damage while wearing some pretty decent armor, but still has all the great things that Bards have to offer. And this is one of the reasons I think Bards multi-class so well. The final reason, of course, is because Bards use Charisma, which is shared with Paladins, Paladins, Warlocks, and Sorcerers, and then of course Bards, right? Meaning that any multi-classes with those 3 classes are probably going to be fairly strong. And sure enough, all 3 are going to be represented in the upper ranks of today's ranking system. Probably no surprise. So to quickly go over the ranking system, basically I used the same one that everybody else on the internet seems to use, or at least a variation of it, where we have our A tier, B, C, D, and F. But then reigning supreme above them all is the S tier. And S tier is like our super or supreme or whatever other thing starting with an S that you want that's similar to that. Basically, it's our God tier. And I haven't put anything in the God tier so far. I've been tempted a couple times. We've had some very strong builds. But to me, if everything just goes into the God tier, then it's not a God tier. It doesn't mean anything, right? So I'm trying to reserve it for just the strongest and absolute best builds. And so far, nothing has made it. But today, that might change. So, as I also mention in every video, there's 3 main reasons I like to multi-class. I already mentioned number 1, which is to become even stronger in whatever your like chosen proficiency is, right? And I find there's a lot of builds that are like B class builds where, let's say you just want to be great in combat, and you know, a lot of those multi-classes absolutely dominate in combat. And to me, that's a great B class tier build if all you want to do is that, right? But the A tier and the S tier usually are like dominant in a couple, like at least one, and very good in the others, or maybe even dominant in like 2 different pillars, or even all 3 pillars of play. And that's what I'm kind of looking for, right? So number 1, to double down on our core proficiency, right? Number 2, to cover for weaknesses in the class. This is something we mentioned already, sorry, with the adding armor to bards, right? You want to be a frontline melee fighter bard, but you got garbage armor. Try combining it with a class that doesn't have garbage armor. And reason number 3 is to gain more utility. Now, in the case of bards specifically though, bards are already one of the best utility characters in the entire game. You've got expertise, you've got jack of all trades, you've got a very strong like support, heavy spell list, you know? And so I'm probably not going to be multi-classing into something else as a bard to gain more utility. But I might want to dip bard as somebody else to gain utility. And I think that's perfectly viable. But most of the multi-classes we're going to be looking at today are not going to be around gaining more utility, because the bard already does that a lot. The one thing the bards usually don't do super well is a lot of damage. And that is something we'll probably be looking to add to in a bunch of these different builds. So let's just jump right in, going as always in alphabetical order. We will start with the Artificer. Now, I do think there's some good reasons to go Artificer, especially at lower levels. Your tool proficiencies, you can get some medium armor and shields, and potentially even heavy armor, depending on what subclass you choose. You do get some minor spells. You get your magical infusions, so you can, you know, get some minor magical items as well. And I think this is all pretty good stuff. But as I've mentioned with Artificers before, unless you're taking a lot of Artificer levels, your infusions aren't really going to get any better. And once you start finding like better magic items, those minor magic items, which were really nice at low levels, aren't really doing much for you in the mid to higher level range. Now, if your campaign never gets to mid or high levels, no big deal, right? But if it does, those Artificer levels aren't really doing much for you anymore. However, I do think there's some decent reasons here to maybe go Artificer. And like I said before, every Artificer subclass gives you some bonus action options. That could be handy. I'm probably not going to want to attack with my intelligence, but I might, you know, you never know, right? That could potentially be good. The real downside, of course, of the Artificer is that it's requiring intelligence, my bards are requiring charisma, and the Artificer is only a half spellcaster, so if I'm looking to add to my spellcasting, it's probably not going to be with Artificer, and if I'm looking to add to my like martial prowess, it's probably also not going to be with Artificer. But that being said, I don't think Artificer is terrible, so I decided to give it a B ranking overall. It's probably more of a B minus if I was to use, you know, B plus, B minus, or B. I'd say it's more of a B minus. Like I said, it is kind of front end loaded where we can get some really nice stuff at lower levels. I just don't think that going beyond that it really has the value that some of the others do. But still, it's not a bad multi-class. So, you know, it's there. It's in the B's. Next, we have the Barbarian. If I'm going Barbarian, I'm probably looking to combine it with either the College of Swords or the College of Valor. I'm probably not wanting to focus on a more caster-heavy bard, because I'm not going to be able to cast spells or concentrate on spells while raging. And so that's kind of a huge drawback. It's actually a massive drawback on a full caster like bard. And unlike, say, the Warlock or someone like that who could get Eldritch Smite potentially, and I could use those spell slots in combat just as smites instead of casting, that's not an option as a bard. That being said, I do think there's some good reasons why Barbarian can be a pretty decent choice. If I wasn't planning on casting a lot of spells anyways, I can use my spells out of combat for healing or for support type spells, and really focusing more on that area of play. And then take something like let's say College of Swords, for example. I can take the 2-weapon fighting style, and because I'm getting extra damage to my rages, that bonus action attack is actually going to be contributing quite a bit of damage. Usually we find, if you really look at 2-weapon fighting is really strong at low levels. If you only have 1 attack around normally, doubling that to 2 is suddenly great. The problem is, though, that because you only ever have 1 bonus action, that as you level up more, you get more options of things you can do with your bonus action, and now you have to kind of make some decisions. You have more things competing for that one slot, and of course, multi-attack starts to kind of dominate it and overwhelm it more. And if we're using feats, things like Sharpshooter and Grip and Mastery start adding huge chunks of damage, whereas 2-weapon fighting is not really adding more than it was at lower levels, right? But one way that we can get around that drawback is by just finding ways to boost our damage per hit. And then that bonus action is still contributing a fairly decent chunk of damage, right? So if you're able to smite and you can use a bonus action attack, that's pretty good. If you're raging and you can apply that rage bonus to that bonus action attack, again, that's not too bad. And because you have the 2-weapon fighting, you're still able to use your ability score, and that gives you some decent options still. So I don't think it's awful. I don't think it's great. I think that at lower levels, if you start Barbarian at level 1, getting proficiency on concentration saving throws by constitution saving throws, of course, is really nice. Having 12 hit points plus your con mod at level 1 is a lot better than 8 plus your con mod at level 1. So, I do think that taking just a couple levels of Barbarian, or starting Barbarian 1, then going to like College of Swords or College of Valor 6, getting extra attack, and then going back for another level to maybe 2 to 4 levels of Barbarian total, getting the extra ability score increase if we really want it. I don't think that's bad. So overall, I'm giving it a C ranking. I don't think that it's great either, but it's not awful. And Rage is a pretty nice mechanic, especially if you're going to be on the front lines a lot and you tend to be a little squishier, This also can give us more armor options, right? So I don't think it's bad by any means, but like I said, I don't think it's great either. So next we're moving on to Cleric. Cleric is a great way to get some better armor proficiencies and shields, of course. Number one, just any of the Cleric subclasses are going to give you medium armor, but a bunch of them give you heavy armor as a bonus proficiency. And one level of Cleric could give you some really nice armor. It could give you, some subclass abilities, because of course Clerics get their domain right at level 1. And, I think that actually there's a lot to offer here. Cleric's also a full caster, meaning that even though your bard levels aren't going to be advancing, your overall multiclassing, when you look at the charts, your spell levels continue to advance. So it's not really costing you anything as far as your level advancement. It just means you're going to be getting, like, you'll have a 4th level spell slot maybe, but you won't have a 4th level spell yet, right? So it's kind of like being like half a level behind, sort of. But overall, I think it's pretty strong. The only real drawback, of course, being that Clerics needing wisdom. I think that's really and the fact that other than the armor, you may not be getting necessarily a huge boost. And then this is kind of what prevents me from putting Cleric in that S tier, is that you're covering for one of the core weaknesses of the class. You are adding a bit more versatility through some other spell options. And there are some pretty good things there. Some of the specific domains might offer a lot, like I think lore and knowledge domains, if you want to be more of a skill monkey. Having more skill options is great. I think war and forge domains are probably pretty good if you're going to be like a swords or valor college. Life, of course. I don't think the life's as strong as it used to be combined with bard, because spell casting, the spell lists have changed over time and more stuff's been added. But even still, like 1 level life cleric makes you a really strong healer, right? And if you just wanted to like maybe not even be a healer, but you're like, well, I'm gonna have some healing spells. This gives me heavy armor if I want it, and it gives me bonuses to my healing. That's not too bad, you know? So I think those are all some pretty good options. I think that if you wanted more cleric, then Tempest might work okay as well, because with your magical secrets, you can take different spells from different school trees, and you can take some like good lightning and thunder spells that don't sometimes appear even on your domain list as a Tempest domain cleric. But that is requiring a lot more cleric levels to really start paying off, which I don't know that I'm that interested in. Either way, though, I'm giving Cleric an A tier. The fact that with only 1 level I can get some domain features, I can get any armor I want depending on which domain I choose. I think that those are all really good pickups for only a 1 level investment. And it's a pure spellcaster, meaning that we're, you know, like I said, really like half a level behind on our spellcasting, as opposed to, say, like a fighter where we'd be a full level behind, right? So Cleric gets an A. Next is the Druid. Druid, I find, just doesn't offer as much to bards as Cleric does. There's other subclasses or other class combinations where Druid does really, really well. I find that this just really isn't one of them. Losing metal armor by being Druid isn't as big of a deal, because unless we were going Valor Bard, we probably weren't going to be wearing medium armor anyways. The main thing, though, is that your wild shapes just scale really poorly unless you're going really heavy on the Druid levels. And even if you go like Circle of the Moon, it's just not really offering as much. You're probably not going to be using it in combat, at least not beyond really, really low levels. It can offer some scouting abilities, which could still be nice. You do get some different spell options, which, again, pretty nice, but probably only low-level ones. I think that, like, Circle of Dreams and Circle of Shepherd can both be nice for, you know, being an even better support. But like I said, Bard's already a pretty strong support. So in general, I don't see any really, like, compelling reason to go Druid when Cleric just gives us so much more. So in the end, I'm giving Druid a D rank. It's definitely not an F, but I mean, I don't know that it's a really strong one either. Next, we have Fighter. So Fighter, especially if we start Fighter, we can have that D10 hit points at level 1. We're getting any armor type we want. We're getting Constitution saving throws proficient, and thus concentration saving throws. 2 levels of Fighter is going to give us Action Surge, of course. We're also getting, you know, in addition to that, we're getting our fighting style. We're getting our self-only heal. Different subclasses offer a lot. Like Eldritch Knight, for example, if you wanted to be with a more martial-focused character, this can give us Shield. The Shield spell, by default, is not on the Bard spell list. And I have a really hard time justifying using a 5th level magical secret to learn the 1st level shield spell. That's just not great in my opinion. But like I said, Eldritch Knight, you could take, say, 3-4 levels of Fighter. It's going to give you a lot on like a College of Swords Bard, for example, right? Champion's another good choice. It's going to double your crit chance, meaning that if you want to use like Blade Flourishes and things, they're going to have double the effect. You're going to be able to double that armor class, double the damage boost, double the knockback if that's what you chose to use. I think that they all really have a lot to offer. Battle Master, of course, gives you a lot of tactical abilities and some really great options in combat. And really, every fighter subclass has something good to offer. So in the end, I was tempted even to put Fighter in the S tier, but I didn't. I put it in the A tier instead, mostly because I felt that there's another option that does a lot of what Fighter does, but just does it even better. We're not quite there yet. Next option is Monk. I'm sorry, monks. I know every single time I do a video, when we get to multiclassing with Monk, it always gets a terrible rating. And this one is no exception. The problem with monks and we'll probably talk about this more in the monk video, so I won't go into a lot of detail here. Monks are perfectly serviceable as just a straight monk class, right? The problem is that when you multi-class with monk, you can't use most of your monk abilities if you're wearing armor, which really leaves out a lot of the reasons I like to multi-class. Like, one of the big things we've been talking about in this bard video is getting armor through things like cleric and fighter as well, when we and paladin or whatever else, right? Is the fact that we can get better armor and augment our defensive abilities, because they are kind of lackluster as a bard. We're not great defensively, and that's a good reason to multi-class. Monk doesn't really give us anything there, and the other problem is monk's not a caster of any sort, not even a half caster, and so it's not helping our spellcasting progression. It makes us incredibly mad or multiple attribute dependent, because now we're needing dexterity, we need wisdom as well, and then of course the bard needs charisma. The monk abilities themselves scale with your monk levels for the most part, because they're all fueled by your key points, right? And this is one of the problems I find with monk, which is that even all your subclass abilities generally use key points. Now, they have kind of moved away from that with some of the later ones, like the Kensai and the Way of Mercy. They've got a bunch of subclass abilities that fortunately aren't always using your key points up. But like, there's monk subclasses that give you spell casting, but your spells, instead of giving you spell slots, use your key points, right? Like, imagine if in order to cast your bard spells, you had to use your bardic inspiration die, or to cast spells as an eldritch knight, you had to use your hit dice or something like that. Like, that doesn't exist in any other class. If you have spells, you get spell slots. But for some reason, monk, they didn't want to give you spell slots, but they wanted to give you spells, and then they are fueled by the same resource that everything else the monk has is fueled by. And it tends to make monks just really poor multi-classers. And I will say that in this specific circumstance with the bard, you could just use unarmored defense, and unless you were going College of Valor, you're not really losing as much, right? So there is that. I think that Kensai and Drunken Master are both not terrible combinations, but again, I don't know that they're better than, say, Fighter or Paladin is, with bard. So in the end, I'm giving Monk an F, but we will put in the caveat that I think the Kensai and Drunken Master are probably more in the D tier. But either way, I know it just sounds like I hate monks every single time, right? But they just don't offer a lot for multiclassing in general. There are a few, like when we get to monk, there are a few strong multiclasses with monk, right? Like rogue's pretty good. Paladin's actually pretty good, because you can smite with all those like flurry of blows and stuff. Although, again, you're a half caster as a paladin and a non-caster as a monk, so your spell slots are growing incredibly slowly. But there are some combinations that aren't so bad, but bard is just not one of them in my opinion. So anyways, moving from the absolute bottom to one of the best bard multi-class options, Paladin. If you start Paladin, you can have the armor proficiencies. Even if you multi-class in, you're still going to get medium armor and a shield, which is as good as Valor Bard was going to give you. Of course, you're getting smite. You're getting things like your lay hands, which can be very nice. That can give you a nice way of augmenting your healing capabilities as a bard. And now you don't need to devote quite as many of your spells to healing spells, which can be pretty good. Another thing is that you can get extra attack as a bard by going College of Swords or College of Valor, or you could get it as a paladin. So depending on how many paladin levels you want, you could go to, like, say 6, for example, which is going to give you your extra attack at 5, and it's going to give you aura protection at level 6, meaning that you get to add your charisma bonus to all your saving throws, and any allies within 10 feet of you are going to do the same. And then you can take more of a spell casting bard focus, like say maybe lore or something like that, get those extra magical secrets at bard 6, and you'll still have a strong martial character. But you could take 2 levels of paladin only, just get smites, or maybe 3 or 4 if you wanted a subclass and maybe the extra ability score increase. Combine that with College of Valor or College of Swords, And suddenly you've got extra attack from them, you've got smites, and you've got a very, very strong martial character with great armor and with a lot of abilities. The other thing is that I find is really, really nice about Paladins in general, and multi-classing with Paladins often even more, because of course the problem with the Paladin is that as a half caster, your spell progression is growing very slowly. But let's say you only took 2 levels of Paladin, all the rest Bard, right? All you want to do is just drop a couple smites. So maybe you go Bard 6, for example, get extra attack, and then you go into Paladin because you're like, you know what, I want to do a bit more damage. You know, the thing is, you're going to have better spellcasting progression that way than you would as a pure Paladin, because your Bard is a full caster. Another thing I find that as you start getting to like those mid or high levels, your first to 4th level spell slots especially start becoming a lot less useful. Now, that's not to say you won't ever cast Shield anymore, or you won't cast Counter Spell or Polymorph and things like that, right? There's obviously going to be exceptions that you'll still cast. But in general, once you're high enough level, you're going to be using most of your spell slots on things like let's say let's say you have Force Cage available, right? You're going to be casting that. You might have like Simulacrum that you might have wanted to cast. You're going to have, like Maze and other like high level spells that are like absolute game changers. And you're going to be using your spell slots on those, and your low level spell slots really serve almost no purpose anymore. The nice thing about, say, Paladin Bard, for example, is that you can use all those low level spell slots on smites, and you still have those high level spells available. So let's say, you get in that big fight and you're fighting some super powerful creature or a bunch of powerful creatures. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to drop a Force Cage this first round because your Bard has Force Cage. So you decide, I'm going to use Force Cage in this round. And then once I'm doing that and the big threat has been kind of contained, we're going to be fighting all the ads, essentially, to use the video game lingo here, all the trash, And, I'll just use my spell slots and smites for that stuff because that's not as urgent. But I still want to do some good damage, right? And now you're able to use all those low-level spell slots and smites, so they're not being wasted. They're not just sitting there, never used. And you still have those high-level spell slots available to cast the really meaningful, game-changing, impactful abilities. And I personally think it's very, very good. So that almost finishes Paladin. I did want to say some of the Paladin subclass features and their spells can be very nice as well. Like Oath of Vengeance, for example. Not only is it going to give you Vow of Enmity, giving you advantage on your attacks against, particularly, against one target, but that's okay. It's like the boss. You use Vow of Enmity, now you've got advantage on all your attacks, right? Nothing wrong with that. But it also gives you spells like Hunter's Mark. So if you didn't have a lot to do with your bonus action, that can be an alright, spell to use, It does kind of eat up your concentration. I tend to like Hunter's Mark quite a bit at lower levels, but as I get to higher levels, I usually have better things to concentrate on. But still, it can be a nice damage boost, so, it's definitely worth mentioning. Oath of Conquest has Armor of Agathis on their spell list, and Armor of Agathis is one that scales extremely well, and it's even better on a character like this than it is on a Warlock, because as a Warlock, your packed spells cap out at 5th level, and after that you're using Mystic Arcanum, which are a different thing, right? Which means that at most you're going to cast Armor of Agathis as a 5th level spell slot. Nothing wrong with that. 25 temporary hit points, somebody hits you, they took 25 damage, right? Let's say you get hit for 15 and 15. They just took 50 damage from your Armor of Agathis, and, you've lost 30 hit points, which is really only 5, because the first 25 were those temporary hit points from the armor. And you did 50 damage without even attacking the guy, just because of his beating on your armor. But now imagine you were able to cast that with, let's say, a 7th level spell slot. And you got hit for 15, 15, and 15. So basically at the end of that, you've lost 35 temporary hit points, 10 real hit points, and done 105 damage back. Like, that is insane. And if you notice that, like, a lot of monster attacks, they tend to get more attacks. They do tend to hit harder, but it's not like it's not like an orc that was hitting you for 10, and then suddenly you're fighting something that's like a CR 15, and now they're hitting you for 80 every time. They're probably hitting you for 25 or 30, which means that during that time, the damage progression on Armor of Agathis has just kept going up and up and up and up. But the damage you're taking, is like doubled or tripled, while your Armor of Agathis has gone up by like 6 or 7 times potentially, right? So that spell just starts getting better and better and better value. You know, obviously Dragon Breath weapons and other special attacks are kind of an exception to that rule, but in general, I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. So overall, this one gets my first ever S ranking. It's great defensively because you can get the Paladin armor. It's great offensively because you can use the smites. You've got, you know, Paladin spell lists and Paladin subclass abilities that could augment your own spell list. And especially some of the low level ones are really nice. And now they're not requiring you to use magical secrets because you probably weren't going to use it on Armor of Agathis either, you know, let's be honest. And I just think it has a lot to offer. Combined with the fact that you could go barely any Paladin at all, or you could take more Paladin if you wanted and still be viable either way. It's just really, really strong. And like I said, to me, this is our first ever absolute god tier multi-class. Next class we have the Ranger. So Ranger is going to give you another skill. It's going to give you some different spell options. It's going to give you a fighting style, of course. I think that the nice thing here is that you can get the archery fighting style. That's one thing that Paladin's not giving us. Paladin, you're pretty much committed to being a frontline fighter type, right? Because, you know, you're not getting archery fighting style from Paladin. You're not getting it from Bard. If you want to go College of Swords, again, front line. If you want to go College of Valor and use a bow, you probably weren't going to go Paladin anyways. So, you know, and I personally think archery is the best fighting style of the game. I think that a lot of them are pretty strong. Some of them are not so much. But just a flat +2 to all your attacks to hit, that is a huge bonus. And I really, really like the archery fighting style a lot. So this is one thing that the Ranger gives us that the Paladin doesn't. Unfortunately, Fighter also gives it to us, and I feel like Fighter's a better choice. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. So I do think that Ranger again can be a nice source of extra attack if you want to concentrate on, if you want to be a martial but not go swords or valor, you know, you could take one of the other ones like eloquence or whispers or lore or whatever, right? And still get extra attack. You know, like I said before, Hunter's Mark is a decent low-level spell if you wanted to use that, you know, nothing wrong there. The main problem I have with Ranger is that once again, Fighter and Paladin just both seem to do the job better. And I don't know that an extra skill and the limited spells that Rangers give us at low levels, especially if we only take a couple levels, are really, really giving us, you know, everything that we might have wanted, right? But it's not bad by any means. So in the end, I'm giving Ranger a C ranking. I think it's perfectly serviceable. I think that there are probably some pretty strong builds if I would have given it more thought. I just feel that Fighter is probably a better option, and Paladin, if I wanted to be on a front line, is probably even better still. So next, moving on to Rogue. And I was really conflicted where to put Rogue, because there's part of me that wanted to put it in the S tier. There's part of me that thought that maybe even the B tier. So in the end, I just gave it an A. I think Rogue offers quite a bit. More skills, thieves' tools, cunning action, expertise. Obviously, sneak attack is great. The reason I didn't rank it even higher, though, is because I kind of felt like if I wanted to go more Bard heavy and concentrate more on spells, I'm not going to have a lot of sneak attack dice. And if I wanted to go with like College of Swords, for example, then I think that's perfectly fine. But if I wanted to play more of an archer, I'm probably going to have to go Valor, and then I'm not getting the archery fighting style either. That's not bad, but either way, I felt like there were probably better ways to build like a martial damage dealer than a Rogue. The one thing, though, that Rogue gives us better than anybody else, and that is a skill monkey build. Rogue plus Bard is ridiculous. You could get like expertise in, well, I mean, actually even with low level, you'll have 4 different skills. You could potentially get even like 6 though, I think, maybe even more. that's a lot of things to have expertise in. And of course, we've also got Jack of all trades, giving us half our proficiency bonus rounded down on anything we're not proficient in. The only problem I really had with this, because I've actually seen somebody play this kind of build before, and it's not that expertise isn't amazing, because it is. It's not that Jack of all trades isn't amazing, because it is. But you kind of get to this point where you're probably going to either like make the skill check or you weren't. And having expertise in like 6 different skills sometimes just isn't as good as having expertise in a couple skills plus smites. You know what I'm saying? Like, did you really need to have expertise in 6 different skills? And again, that's not to say that it's bad by any means. More expertise is obviously better than less expertise. But again, it's all about trade-offs. And the more rogue levels I take, the less spell casting I have from Bard. The more Bard I take, the less rogues kind of giving me, other than maybe some skill bonuses, because I'm not getting a lot of sneak attack dice. I'm not really getting a lot of other things from it. And so, in the end, my A ranking was basically just because I felt like it was the middle ground between the two extremes, I guess. And, I mean, I don't know, there's no real bad way to build this class, though, right? So, I mean, even at worst, if you just wanted to be a skill monkey, which isn't at worst, that's fine, by the way, you know, you're gonna have lots of skills, you're gonna have lots of proficiencies, you're gonna have expertise, you're gonna have half your proficiency bonus on anything that you're not already proficient in. That's not a bad character by any means, right? Does it really like help me to dominate in some of the other pillars of play? It can, you know, like exploration or social pillar. If I have expertise on a lot of that stuff, that can be really good. You know, I still have lots of spell casting. So, and that's what I mean. Like, do I need that much expertise? Maybe not. But is it bad? No. Like, is it S tier though? Maybe. I don't really know. And so, like I said, in the end, I'm giving it an A. You know, whatever. Let's move on, though. That's enough time on the rogue. Like I said, that's a hard one for me to rank because I don't really know where I value some of that stuff necessarily, right? But either way, it's very strong. Sorcerer. Speaking of very strong, the main reason to go Sorcerer, of course, is to get meta magic. Meta magic is awesome. Things like Subtle Spell on a Bard are like really cool too, because then you can like cast spells on people without them even knowing you're casting spells on them, and it's pretty good. Some of the Sorcerer subclasses, like especially Draconic, can be pretty good, giving you some armor and extra hit points. Not bad. Shadow is pretty good. The nice thing about Sorcerer is that much like the Cleric did, we get to choose our subclass right at level 1, and so that gives us a really like nice set of abilities that we can get with just like a very small dip. However, I would never really dip Sorcerer without going at least 3 levels. Three, there we go, the number 3. 3 levels so that I can get meta magic, right? I'm probably never going to take like just 1 level like I might with Cleric. What's the point? I probably wanted meta magic. The only thing that really, I gave Sorcerer an A, by the way. The only thing that really kept it out of S tier for me was that I'm already pretty good at spellcasting as a Bard. Sorcerer's not really doing much to like shore up my weaknesses, and one of the main things I want from a Bard is just better armor and more survivability. And Sorcerer's not really giving me any of that. In fact, it's probably giving me less because I've got D6 hit points mixed in there. That being said, though, I could get the shield spell from Sorcerer, so that's at least worth considering. And there are some like really good things. The other thing is, though, that Sorcerer has one of the same problems that Monks does, which is that my sorcery points scale with my sorcerer level. So if I want to be able to use my meta magic a lot, I kind of need a lot of sorcery levels. And that means I'm never going to have as many high-level Bard spells as I might have wanted to have. And I don't know, I just feel like if I really want to concentrate on my spell casting, then I'm probably going to want more Bard levels. And if I wanted to concentrate on being like a melee character, then Sorcerer probably wasn't going to be my pick anyways, right? So I don't know that, obviously it's still very, very strong. I'm not trying to knock it at all. Obviously, the fact that you're all charisma, the fact that Sorcerer gives you meta magic, and meta magic is awesome, let's be honest, is very, very strong. I just don't know that it's quite as strong as the next option on the list. And so I decided to give it an A because the next option is Warlock. And I feel like Warlock is just an even better mix than Sorcerer. Now, obviously, I might be biased because Warlock is my favorite class in the entire game. As I've mentioned many times, it's my favorite, but it's not the best. But it is my favorite. And but I just feel like Warlock really is, much like the Paladin, it's really just a very flexible and powerful combination with Bard. Again, we're looking at all charisma. But Warlock, you could take something like, say, a Hexblade, and with one level of Hexblade, you can have medium armor and a shield, which solves a lot of the Bard's defensive problems. You could be making attack rolls with charisma, which solves one of the problems that College of Swords and College of Valor have, which is that you need strength or dexterity to attack with, plus charisma for your spells. Now you can be using charisma for everything. And that's one level of Warlock. You also get in your Hexblade's Curse, which can be a nice way to boost your damage and your crit chance. Probably just on a boss fight, right? But whatever, nothing wrong with that. It scales with your proficiency bonus, meaning that it's not scaling with your Warlock levels, it's scaling with your overall levels. So Hexblade's Curse remains very, very valuable all the way through your career. And like I said, attacking with charisma, if I'm a College of Swords Bard, that's awesome. I don't have great armor, but I took one level of Hexblade, and now I can wear medium armor and use a shield. Again, awesome. It just has so much to offer there. The other thing is too, though, I don't have to be a martial build on this character. If I just wanted to be a blaster, I could take any Warlock subclass, but I could still take Hexblade if I wanted, right? And with 2 levels of Warlock, not the 1, I could have Agonizing Blast. I can obviously take Eldritch Blast as my cantrip. And I could have one other invocation of my choice. I could take a Repelling Blast. I could take, what's it called? Is it Eldritch Concentration? The new one in Tasha's that gives you advantage on concentration saving throws, whatever that invocation is. It's basically Warcaster, but not as good because you don't get like the opportunity attacks where you can use a cantrip and stuff. But advantage on all your concentration saving throws, whatever that invocation was called. It's Eldritch Concentration or Constitution or something. I don't know. They're all Eldritch, so that doesn't nail down anything. But anyways, whatever the one is that gives you advantage on your concentration, that can be very nice as well, right? You could take something like Devil's Sight potentially, right? So there's so much you can get with only a 1 or 2 level Warlock dip. And by the way, it's not like you have to go Hexblade. I'm currently playing a Warlock Bard multiclass, go figure, in a Bard campaign. It's just started. We've only played 1 game so far. And I'm playing just a blaster. I'm not bothering with a sword or anything like that, right? But I didn't go Hexblade, even though I probably should have for the armor bonuses. But I've already played Hexblade a bunch of times. I wanted to try one of the other ones. And I went with Genie, just because I wanted the cool little bottle where I can like have my own little room and store stuff in it. And, you know, because I have a bunch of different musical instruments, one of the ones I chose was the grand piano. And it's kind of hard to haul a grand piano around on a pony. Not really the best of choices. But if you have it in your tiny little Genie bottle, and then anytime you need it, you can just like go grab it and bring out your grand piano when you want to perform. Suddenly that's a lot better. And it's just cool and it's flavorful, you know. I also have a hurdy-gurdy, by the way, because, you know, just cranking that stupid thing. It's just awesome. Anyways, enough about my specific character, though. But the point is, with only a couple levels of Warlock, you can add Eldritch Blast plus Agonizing Blast. You have the Hex spell. You have Armor of Agathis that we've already mentioned, of course, under the Paladin section. And it just has so much to offer. And Hex has the same problem that Hunter's Mark does, right? Once you get to higher levels, even if you're able to hit 3 or 4 times with an Eldritch Blast, that can sometimes be worth it. But in general, I'm probably going to have something else I want to concentrate on that's just better. But at low levels, especially around like level 5 or 6, when you first get that extra bolt of damage on your Eldritch Blast, Hex is a pretty nice damage boost at low levels. Now, again, as monsters get to higher and higher levels, their hit points start going like this. Adding an extra d6 to an extra attack is way less advantageous than just, locking them out of combat somehow, right? But at low levels, Hex is a really nice damage boost. So, nothing wrong with that. Like I said, Agonizing Blast is pretty good. This really solves one of the Bard's big problems where you don't really have a good, reliable, spammable damage source, right? You don't really have a lot of good damage spells. Now you've got a cantrip. You can just use it infinitely. You could add a Repelling Blast or a Grasp of Hadar if you wanted to have some forced movement to it as well. It just becomes really, really, really valuable. Another thing, of course, is that you get your patron right at level 1. So much like Sorcerer and Cleric, it means that only that 1 or 2 level dip can offer quite a bit, because now you've got like the subclass abilities, you've got some spell options, right? Depending on what patron you chose. You might have some cool other abilities, like maybe you didn't want to go with the Genie, maybe you didn't want to go Hexblade. You could have the Telepathy of the Great Old One. You could have that Tentacle from like the Fathom list that like just smacks stuff around and does extra damage and has like a slowing effect and stuff. That can be pretty handy, giving you a bit more crowd control and some damage as well. Good use of a bonus action. Like basically every subclass for Warlock has something decent to offer at level 1 or 2, even if it's just a Fiend getting like temporary hit points when you get a killing blow. That can be pretty nice, So I feel like overall, this is just one of the best multi-classes available to the Bard. I give this one a solid S tier, and I actually think it edges out the Paladin just slightly. Just because, again, it's very, very versatile. You could get extra attack from your Warlock levels if you wanted to go high enough in Warlock. You could just take 1 or 2 levels of Warlock, and it's fine. In fact, something we didn't mention, but you could go Bard, Paladin, and take 1 level of Hexblade, and then you could be attacking with Charisma and smiting with your Paladin abilities and using your Bard spell slots to do it. You could have best of all 3 worlds right there. That actually is a great multi-class, by the way. But yeah, it's just very versatile. It's all using Charisma. It got a lot to offer with only 1 or 2 levels, depending if you want to be more of the caster, you're probably going to look at 2. If you want to be a melee, you might still want 2, but 1's probably enough, And it just offers so much. So like I said, it is a solid god tier multi-class, in my opinion. So now that brings us to our final one, which is the Wizard. Usually I really like Wizard, but I think Wizard and Bard isn't exactly the strongest mix. Almost anything I wanted from Wizard, I probably could have got from Sorcerer, and it would have just been much stronger, in my opinion. This is partly because, of course, you're needing intelligence and you're needing charisma. That's never great. Again, though, the Wizard has a lot of the same weaknesses of the Sorcerer, meaning that it's not really helping with our survivability, and it's not offering as much from like a casting damage point of view unless we take more levels of Wizard. And, that just means I'm not getting as many high-level Bard spells, which is probably not great. So overall, I'm giving Wizard a D. I will say, though, there are 2 specific Wizard subclasses that I think rate higher. I'm going to say they're probably both a C, so they're going to be our exemptions. And these are, probably unsurprisingly, the War Wizard and the Blade Singer. So if you wanted to play a more martial-focused Bard, I think that both of these are pretty solid choices. War Wizard only requires 2 levels. And as we already know, you can use your reaction to give yourself a +2 to your armor class. That's not bad. It also is going to give you shield, because shield's on your Warlock, or on your Wizard spell list, of course, right? So that's another nice perk as well. But better yet, you could also give yourself a +4 to any saving throw. And to me, this is a really, really big gain. So I actually don't mind the idea of 2 levels of War Wizard. Is it as good as going Warlock? Is it as good as going Sorcerer? Is it as good as Paladin? No to all of those. But it's by no means a bad multiclass, right? And that's why I say it's probably a C. It might even be like a high C even. The next one, of course, is the Blade Singer. Now, the downside to Blade Singer is that now you're probably looking at 6 levels of Wizard. And You know, if you only have 2 levels of wizard for like your war wizard, you can kind of get away with 13 intelligence, right? You've only got some first level spells. You can take stuff that doesn't require a saving throw or a hit roll, and your 13 intelligence is probably going to be able to get you by. But if you're looking at 6 levels of wizard, you're probably not going to be able to get through with only 13 intelligence. I mean, I'm not saying you can't, but it's probably not going to be great. You know, just saying. That's kind of pushing things. But of course, the advantages to the Blade Singer is, number one, you can get some nice armor class boosts from your Blade Song and some movement boosts and everything else. It helps to shore up some of those weaknesses that your, say, College of Swords Bard might have had, right? Number two, you don't just get extra attack at level 6. You get, like, the best version of extra attack, except for maybe fighters who get, you know, just more and more and more, of course. But you can use a cantrip and an extra attack. So you get your regular attack with your weapon, and you could cast like a Booming Blade or a Green Flame Blade. And this is pretty big. So I actually don't mind this at all. The core drawback, like I said, being that now I need 6 levels of wizard to make this work. And also, don't forget, because I'm, you know, unless I go with something like a 1 level of Hexblade here as well, I'm going to need Charisma to cast my Bard spells, I'm going to need Intelligence for my Wizard spells, and I'm going to need Dexterity, or maybe Strength, but probably Dexterity, to land my melee attacks. And that's starting to spread me pretty thin. Now, like I said, I could take a level of Hexblade, which allows me to attack with Charisma now, but at this point, do I really need those 6 levels of Blade Singer? I don't know that it's really the best investment, because we're starting to look at so many other levels away from Bard, and that is starting to be a big drawback for me. But overall, I still think it's not a bad mix. The Blade Singer extra attack is phenomenal. I mean, let's be honest. It is a great ability, and adding Blade Songs on top of that is by no means a bad thing by any stretch, right? You also get things like, you could get Counterspell, you know, you have Shield, you could have Find Familiar, Mirror Image. Like, there's a lot of really great low-level wizard spells that you could be adding to your repertoire, and, you know, none of those are bad things. The main thing is, though, that it's just slowing down your progression so much, and it means you're never going to get the higher-level Bard spells. But if you're only looking at a mid-level campaign where maybe you're only going to get the 12 or 13, maybe you don't care that much, right? Maybe you're just like, I kind of want to go with a Blade Singer Wizard, but add some Bard stuff and maybe Jack of all trades and that kind of stuff. I think that can be decent. Like I said, is it the strongest one out there that you could be making? No, I would say not. I think there's much better choices you can make. But it's also not awful. So, whatever. It's definitely worth mentioning. Anyways, that brings us to the conclusion of that segment. So now, as usual, we're going to talk about where everything ranks on the tier system. So in the S tier, for the first time ever, we have 2 S tier candidates. We have the Warlock, and number 2, we have the Paladin. And I think they're both very, very close. I do put the Warlock slightly ahead, but Paladin is so good. Both are just absolute god tier multi-classes. Then we have the A tier, and in order I have the Fighter, followed very closely by the Cleric, then followed very closely by the Sorcerer, and then down a ways we have the Rogue. But still A tier, so, you know, not bad by any means. In the B tier, by themselves, the loneliest of classes, we have the Artificer. Then in the C tier, we have Barbarian and Ranger. And honestly, I couldn't decide whether Barbarian was ahead or Ranger was ahead. The rage mechanic preventing you from concentrating or casting spells is a huge negative to the Barbarian. On the other hand, though, I felt like Rage and Reckless Attack were both such unique mechanics and both added like new elements to the character that Ranger just didn't add. Like at the end of the day, anything I got from Ranger, I could have gotten from Fighter or Paladin probably, and it would have been better. So I kind of give Barbarian a slight edge, just because, you know, if I really want reckless attack and rage, that's the only place I'm going to get it, right? Whereas if I wanted, say, archery, I could have gotten that somewhere else. If I wanted to just boost my damage with some low-level spells like Hunter's Mark or whatever, I could have gotten even those from somewhere else. Like maybe I could have gotten Warlock, or I could have gone, you know, Oath of Conquest Paladin, or Oath of Vengeance Paladin, sorry. You know, so there's just other options. So at the end of the day, I give Barbarian a very, very, very slight lead ahead of the Ranger. Then, I guess not the loneliest of classes, because by themselves in D tier, we have the Druid, and by themselves in the F tier, we have the Monk. Monk's really the loneliest of multi-classes, at least. Like I said, pure Monk isn't so bad, but boy, they just do not multi-class well. I'm sorry, Monk. It's not your, well, it is your fault. It's your fault for not getting to use your abilities while wearing armor or anything else practically. Anyways, that though is going to bring us to the end of this video. So feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, as I always say, leave me your comments in the comment section. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear your experiences playing these different classes. Maybe you agree with some of my rankings, maybe you don't. Maybe you're like, you know, I thought Fighter could have been an S class, you know, and you put it in A. And that, by the way, that's perfectly valid. Like I said, I'm very stingy on what I put into the S class. To me, I just really, really want like just the best of the best of the best. But if I give something an A, I still consider that to be a phenomenal multiclass. I consider B to be a really good multiclass. I've played B multiclasses and had a blast doing it. And I thought those characters were great. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with that by any means. Anyways, I'm starting to lose my voice because I'm still kind of sick, I guess. So we're going to just wrap things up there. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.